So now we start with the panel session on innovation that continues speaking about the strategic challenge of innovation. So without further ado, I will ask those people that will be a part of the panel after Mr. Cosio's presentation. We have Maria Izquierdo, analyst at the Independent Authority for Fiscal Responsibility, IREF, Maru Menendez, the Deputy Director of the Public Employment Service, SEPE, Joseba Zalakain. Yes, please take a seat. Joseba Zalakain, Director of the CIS, Documentation and Studies Center, and Javier Ramos, Head of the Lambide Department, Basque Employment Service.
Tienen ruedas. Aquí está. Nos han puesto.
We have to be careful with the chairs. We have to work in a dynamic manner. That's why they move. Well, we have with us now the 4 people that will be working with us. And now Jaime told me, now you have to explain how to do everything that I've just explained in theory. So we have a big challenge, and I'm really happy, and it's wonderful to be with you all here. You all have very interesting profiles, but I'm really happy with the response of the audience. I saw that in the second day everyone was participating with questions, and that's really the point of this. A conference like this one wants to create a dialogue and have a joint reflection, which is the main aim of the conference. Maria Izquierdo, hello, good morning. Maria, as I said, I'm going to introduce all of them so we have a general idea, and then we go to their views. She's analyst in the Independent Authority for Fiscal Responsibility, where she mainly works in the assessment of public policies in the labor sphere. She has a degree of mathematics by the University of Santiago de Compostela and a master's on applied statistics and public statistics by the University of Alcalá de Henares. He belongs to the group of statistics that works for the state and has worked in the Statistics National Institute for many years, where she had different positions working in expense analysis, and she's also collaborated in different work groups and international forums like Eurostat, ODCE, and so on and so forth. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. You've just heard about me, and many of you will ask yourselves, what is this lady doing here? What does she have to do with employment? And the same thing, I asked myself exactly the same thing when I was invited. But I'm very pleased to be here, but also overwhelmed, because Jaime was saying for 25 years I've been working on this and I don't know that much. Well, I come here to speak on behalf of the IREF, Analyst and Independent Authority for Fiscal Responsibility. We've been working in the field of employment only for 3 years. And it's difficult to come here and speak before all the experts, as well as doing all the evaluations we've done in this field. Evaluations of the performance of the employment services. So the term of complexity that Jaime highlighted is something that you observe as soon as you start looking into this field. As I was saying, I'm fascinated by everything Jaime has mentioned, so I'm going to try and focus on what I wanted to say. And please allow me to explain what the Independent Authority for Fiscal Responsibility does, how we can contribute, and what we've done in the employment sphere. IREF is a young body that has the mandate of looking into the sustainability of public finances. It's a mean to make sure there's economic growth and welfare that is linked to employment policies. But what brings me here is that after we started our activity, we received a mandate in compliance with commitments with the European Commission of reviewing the public expense. This is structured in the spending reviews, and this is carried out in different stages, 3 stages specifically, and this had to be done between 2018 and 2021. And in these projects, we look into different areas of spending, like the employment services, but also health, education. So it has a very broad approach. In the spheres we address, as well as evaluating each of these spheres, you know that assessment can have different typologies depending on the policy, and IREF has assessed politics ex post, but we've also done all kinds of assessments. So in this very short time, we've considered different approaches. So this brings me, and I wanted to link this with what you mentioned before regarding innovation, change, and going little by little. Was an institution like us, why is it evaluating? Well, the circumstances have brought us to this situation. We started and then little by little, step by step, maybe without the structure, resources and adequate context, we've carried out evaluation activities that start to become more significant and are consolidated. And in this process and in parallel, we reflect on the direction, and it ends, or let's better said, we now start a more stable and institutionalized pathway in which recently, with the support of the Recovery and Resilience Plan, now we have a specific department for spending reviews in a permanent manner, and also they can be demanded by all different levels of government.
This has given rise to 14 projects, 5 which will be finishing in the next few months. So there's a lot of work going on in a very short space of time, especially if you think about the team that we've got. And this has been possible thanks to collaboration with different stakeholders. And linked to this idea, as was said earlier, that knowledge isn't located in a specific place, but rather different expertise is coming from private sector, from the academia, and from different government bodies can come together and share that knowledge. With that, we're now starting along a more formal path, as it were. In addition to this department, the recovery plan adds some very positive things, which is that they shouldn't be included in the political cycle, because you need political backing for this to work, but it needs to be ongoing. And the idea of meeting or explaining. Any work that the IRF does, therefore, needs to be reflected in the reports of those who review the programs, and if they're not monitored, it needs to be explained why they've been left out of the monitoring. So it's not like an inspection, but rather it's a process of institutionalizing reviews so that recommendations don't just end up as recommendations, but the whole cycle of knowledge creation is closed. Just 1 minute. What I'm trying to say to you is, what have we done in employment? Just a little bit of what we've done in the field of employment. In the field of employment, we started working on a project to review the spending on active employment policies. It was a very broad project where we looked at strategy, procedure, effectiveness and efficiency. And to draw one thing from that, which I think is essential and is what we're talking about today here, they highlighted the importance of the CISPE, the CISPE, and its importance to pool data and to carry on progressing and generating this essential tool of assessments or reviews, which are data. But also attention was concentrated on indicators, because at the end of the day, indicators are a change lever, and it's essential to choose the indicators properly so that the activity is correctly oriented. The next thing was far more quantitative. It was an impact assessment. This is an area which in Spain we're slightly behind on, i.e. whether the modifications and reductions in social security contributions had been effective in creating jobs. There we learnt, and initially there was a negative view on of these reductions, and what we learned, they had worked actually. However, the impact is short and doesn't possibly reach the most vulnerable of the population. So in this first round, I want to tell you how important it is for there to be assessment in the whole of a life of a policy. And it's a lever to drive some of the changes that you mentioned earlier. Perhaps in the next round, I can talk a little bit more in depth about that. Thank you, Maria. We don't have a lot of time, so that's why I was asking you to stick to your time. Let's now move on to Maru Menendez. She's Subdirector General of Public Employment Services. She's got a lot of experience in politics in the world of trade unions. She was a MP in the Madrid Autonomous Regional Parliament. And she's occupied many jobs in the public employment service. And just to give you an idea of what she's been doing recently, she was behind the 2019 to 2021 youth employment plan. Also a plan to assist in the long-term employed. She's coordinated the Spanish strategy for active support of employment 2021-2024, the 2021 to 2026 youth guarantee plan, and she's also identified best practices and so on and so forth. So I think she's an excellent person to tell us, from her perspective, how you are promoting innovation in employment. Thank you so much, Fernando. Good morning to everybody. First thing I wanted to do was to say thank you for inviting me to take part in this 4th Employment Congress. I'd like to thank the Minister and Deputy Lendakari, and all our colleagues from Lanbide for having allowed me to be here. I apologize for the Director General of SEPE's not here, because he would have loved to be here, but we just coincided in this Congress with the start of the 45th edition of the ILO, the Interfor ILO. So it was impossible. That's why we're not going to be staying much longer here. We'd like to, of course. I want to link up with what the previous speaker said, especially with what Jaime and Maria said. One of the most disruptive things that exist is IREF. When they talk about the assessment of active employment policies, I say that because it really is really important. Cooperation processes are necessary to reach our goal. The strategic goals that we share, that Jaime mentioned earlier, and are important. I'm going to concentrate, as I've got limited time, on the 2021, 22, 24 strategy for employment, active strategy for employment, which is person and company centered. But I want to talk about companies, businesses, because as a result of shared debate and much assessment, we became clearly aware of the fact that we are working for people, with people, and yet maybe we had a lot of our weak point was companies, was business. The National Employment Service has this is its weak flank. The second strategic aim is consistency with strategic transformation. There's no point in having these employment strategies, which aren't the ones that create jobs. Sometimes, and I don't need to clarify that, but sometimes people confuse what we do. But what it does have to do with is it needs to be consistent with our productive transformation. If there's time, we'll later see the plan of transformation and resilience as a whole, and component 23, which is led by the Ministry of Labour and Social Economy. The third strategic goal is that we be results-based. How can we start? Right at the beginning of our design of these active policies, the fact that we're results-orientated. Once we, even from the word go, the fourth strategic goal behind our strategy is to upskill the public employment services. We can't think that we're going to meet our goals if we're not instrumentally able to improve these skills on the abilities of our public employment services and the governance of the public employment service. And I want to give you a good piece of news there. Despite the fact that there's been some misunderstandings, perhaps because we needed more information about, for example, our pilot programs, but we're really, really happy in the fact that the national employment system has this ongoing dialogue between the 17 autonomous regions, the state, public employment services, social partners, and other stakeholders in the third sector that actively participate. And of course, with these, the impact of the new plans, the youth employment plan and the long-term unemployed permanent plan, what we've done is we've created this synergies, which goes beyond the world of employment. We've got monitoring committees of both plans, in our case, with the participation of all 17 autonomous regions, the third sector, the social partners, and all the different sections of ministries in the national government that have a remit or have some kind of direct influence in employment, and especially employment for youth and the long-term unemployed. Of course, we need to modernize active employment policies. There's a tremendous opportunity here to reform these active employment policies, which we'd started, but which the natural plan for transformation and resilience actually gave it this final kick. And you, I'm sure, have heard many of the labour market policies are all related to the collective bargaining, different hiring formats, but we're especially concentrating on what we're talking about today. Reform number 5, which is modernisation of active employment policy, where the principle of explaining things, of complying with or adhering to or explaining to, and in this case it's more adhering to, because explaining is something that's in relative terms. And these commitments are very, very important because they're going to help us with the modernization process, undoubtedly. So, together with a decree that has updated some regulations that had been obsolete in some cases for over 30 years into our new strategy, we're now beginning to work on a draft for an Employment Act. And we're also regulating training on the job. I don't know if you know that there's an act that is being prepared, which includes in it an additional proposal on the job training, and also the reform of Law 43, which covers the incentives and discounts. And we've got the first drafts for how this is going to do, which Maria referred to earlier. Or the new Youth Plus Guarantee plan for promoting dignified work amongst the young youth population. Active policies are a lever for ecological and digital and productive transformation. If you look at the 4 axes of our plan, digital transformation, environmental transition, gender equality, and of course social interterritorial cohesion are clearly cross-cutting throughout the whole of this strategy. They are fully aligned with the axes of the National Plan for Resilience and Recovery and are already incorporated into the new strategy. And in all of this, assessment is like the backbone of this new strategy. Some people earlier said, okay, well, how is this implemented? There's personalized assistance. If somebody comes to a job center and says, oh, you know, the resources that I've got, I can't help them. When we talk about personalization, that's what we're talking about, the ability to, via implementation of resources, taking part in the design right from the start, all the different stakeholders, and achieving something which I think really is the most revolutionary challenge which we have ahead of us, and the most difficult, which is the administrative process. How can we really truly get, when designs are shared, when realities are known, when professional practice, accumulated experience and the ability to innovate is more than provable, even so we still have the hurdles of the rigid nature that prevents us from effectively providing in a personalized way all the resources, and we have to explain why, for example, in some cases it doesn't fit in with the overall design for people to be able to provide people, certain kinds of people, with the care that they need, with the assistance that they need. We need to do that all together, because this goes beyond just the field of employment. It requires the assistance of the tax office, of Maru. You don't want to talk about administrative procedure. It's right to say that my time is up. The truth is, our participants in this panel session have got a lot of information, and it'd be great to have time to listen to it, but we are limited on time.
Un poco a Euskadi con dos aportaciones también un poquito más cercanas.
Let's hear something a little bit more local. We've got two public services, public employment services, the local one, Lambidi, and the state service, and two people, Maria and Joseba, that represent two external bodies. One is an external evaluating body, but CIS is an organization that also assists the administration with studies, with research in planning process, and even preparing regulations and so on and so forth. So we've got two active organizations in active employment policies, two public bodies, and two organizations that are collaborating externally. So Joseba, who's got information science degree, and as I said earlier, director of CIS, he's also a member of the advisory council of the Ministry of Science, and that's just to say a few things that you are in charge of. Joseba, I wanted to ask you, in what you've got to say, to concentrate on innovation, and because many of the people here that appear here are suffering from this situation of a risk of social exclusion and also unemployed. And maybe you, because of your experience, can respond to these questions. Yes. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. I wanted to ask, take a different tack to what public employment services do. We are, I understand, being asked to talk about this from the viewpoint of the relationship between employment, insertion onto the labour market, and inclusion processes from the viewpoint of the social services viewpoint and the income guarantee services. We understand that employment is part of the process of social inclusion. We wanted to think about how we should consider access to employment, the way that people access employment in these social inclusion processes. The first thing I'm going to do is going to put out some ideas there that I feel should be considered when we promote active employment policies. And this has been mentioned by the first speaker, how we're able to combine activation and protection ideas, which are two of the functions of all these public policies. And to put everything into context and to raise all of these things that we shouldn't forget. The first is very obvious and has been cropped up during this conference and crops up during all the conferences on employment that we have, and we shouldn't forget about. We've spoken about precariousness. We need to also talk about the erosion of employment's ability create inclusion. We always think of employment that is a tool that guarantees the same rights, the same possibilities of social inclusion as 20, 30 years ago, but that's simply not true. The first thing that we need to do, and this is something that we've obviously been doing for many years now, is what is the inclusive value, the value of the welfare value of some jobs. I'm going to give you some figures. In a recent survey, we learned that 63% of people that are in social exclusion in Spain, this is defined, of course, by a specific way, but those people that are understood to be in a situation of social exclusion, 63% live in houses where people have a job. So that means social exclusion is also linked to jobs, employment, and in 25% of houses where there are salaries, there's a situation of social exclusion. I think this should make us think about the relationship between jobs and social inclusion. I should also like to highlight, and Sarah said this quite clearly yesterday, that sometimes we forget, or I get the impression that we forget, there are two problems. One is access to employment, and the other is the precarious nature of employment. Employment services and active employment policies shouldn't just be for getting people a job. I think increasingly in the future the problem is that we've got more and more jobs. They're not just temporary jobs, part-time jobs or low-paid jobs, but the fact that these jobs don't make people included in society, so they have zero ability to do that. And I think increasingly the issue of employment quality is important. I'd also like to remind you some of the paradigms, some of the approaches that are modifying many policies, and I'm going to just skip through them quite briefly, but which also, I think, should modify employment policies. The first is this paradigm of social investment and social investment and the building of human capital. The second paradigm, which is also very important, is personalization. People have spoken a lot about personalization in this conference, but understanding personalization as a person's ability to self-determine their ability, users' autonomy requires us to change not just active employment policies, but income guarantee policies as well. We need to remember that. The third thing, which is also theoretical, but which you need to consider, which isn't always considered, is the multiple causes for exclusion. If we all accept that exclusion has many sides to it, because it affects many sides to it, that also means that inclusion policies can't just concentrate on employment, on finding a job. When we talk about employment services, we seem to forget the multidimensional nature of exclusion. There are people who don't have problems in finding a job, or the problems that they have in finding a job are secondary in comparison to those problems they have in other fields. We've spoken a lot in this Congress about activation, but I think it's also important to, in general, say there are two ways. There's activation, it's like good activation and bad activation, like good cholesterol and bad cholesterol. And I think there's sufficient evidence to say that activation works, although there isn't sufficient evidence to say which people it most affects. And there are people in Spain and elsewhere that have analysed not just activation policies, but also activation policies for people that are receiving income guarantee monies. But we know that they work. There are two major models for activation. One is which sanctions, which is conditional, which doesn't work. There's this idea, this North American idea, Anglo-Saxon idea of first you find a job, then you work, and then we'll talk about everything. And I think quite clearly that doesn't work. It doesn't create any kind of improvement in quality of life or social inclusion or employability for that matter. There are other ways of understanding activation. In Euskadi, we've tried to activate the law for income guarantee and policies that are developed in the Basque Country to advance in a model that isn't based on active inclusion. That's what we've been talking about in Europe for many years, but inclusive activation. That is, they really are inclusive, that they don't exclude or harm those people that receive them. And to finish, what characteristics do I feel are key, and to what extent can they come to fruition? The first, we've said earlier, that there's the multifaceted nature of this, and not just think that labour market inclusion is also social inclusion. There are people that are a long way from social inclusion and labour market inclusion. They need to work on other things. I think that in the Basque Country people have concentrated on this, taken the opposite tack, and I think we need to understand the definition of the current law needs to be reviewed, because there are people who have needs in other fields, and we want to just avoid saying that social inclusion is the only response to social exclusion or labour market inclusion. Joseba, please be brief. We need to work structurally and personally and avoid people blaming people. This is really important. It's important to have real personalization. What I mean by that is that you take into account all the people's conditioning factors and soft conditionality model to avoid the mistakes that have been made in other countries. I would like to, in the debate, talk about fields of innovation and best practices that... I've got a direct question about that. We'll have opportunity for a direct question. Thank you so much, Joseba, for your words. And let's now move on to our final participant in this panel session. Javier Ramos is in charge today of the technical department of Lanbide. He's always been in the world of employment management services. He's head up projects that are behind the actual origin of Lanbide, the Basque job seeking service, and he was also director of Lanbide when it was first created. The technical cabinet of Lanbide, what it does is it prepares information about the labour market, services, and develop marketing studies about supply and demand in the labour market and define a strategy. So, Javier, it's your turn to talk about innovation in Lanbide. You've got 7 to 8 minutes to do that, at most.
That's exactly what I was seeing, how many minutes I had left. First of all, thank you all for being here at the Palace and Conference.
Que dices, bueno, pues tan mala no era la que yo tenía apuntada porque
I really like what Jaime said, his words. I believe this is a very interesting situation that really affects us right now. The fourth conference after the third is fundamental, after the circumstances of the third. And like Sara said, I really liked the different contributions of the speakers. I would like to introduce a concept, the drama in the labor market in the Basque Country, and I believe this could be present in many other places. Is not a place where we have too many vacancies that we cannot cover because we don't have enough people or because there's a big lack of adjustment. The drama in the Basque Country is that we have 118,000 people that are unemployed, and the production structure and the capacity to generate opportunities does not provide employment for all of these people. And it is here where we have to look towards the public employment services. It's not a magic wand, it's a social need. To define the business of the employment services is not easy. As Anton did yesterday, we're going to try and simplify. We inform about the labor market, we define and manage programs taking into account the policies for training and employment, and we are a labor operator or intermediary. If the aim is to try and shed light on innovation, we should not forget that everything that Jaime suggested must be done as Sarah did. We need to take into account the complex space of incorporation of youth with high levels of unemployment and precariousness, the incorporation of a great amount of people in long-term employment, and the incorporation or at least reduction of the gender gap that continues to exist, how to manage migrations that are so different in origin and skilling, and also how to have a vision of a delocalization company person that technological development allows us to do, how to look at the life of skills that are the main driver for the portfolio of services, and how to position ourselves as a public service in the technological and so complex public service of intermediation. So we need to provide innovation in the spheres that Sara mentioned. This brings us to look into the specific proposals and how we can see how we can progress. And I'm going to go to the Lanbide Ogetzen transformation project. It's a 4-year project and program focusing on the different channels, focusing on governance of the service, and also on the management of offer and demand of skills as the main driver. And both Jaime and Maru have said we need less paperwork and more efficiency, taking into account an important element, which is subsidies and how these subsidies are managed without taking too long. All of this brings me to one of the ideas I liked more, and that Anton. This is to create a better company. I'm going to speak about the 4 improvement areas. Right now, personalization is very important because we have great diversity. We need to have this portfolio services through the internet, telephone, so that we have a balance between advanced management and user experience, and to be closer to the people. Governance. This is something that everyone mentions but we don't find the key elements. The horizontal vision is effective participation of the social agents, and I believe we understand what I mean by this. And then the capacity of a government of having strategic and sectorial plans is so important and conditions the market so much that if we look into this, each of the sectorial strategic plans has an employment axis. So we need to establish the coordination between this axis and these so important strategic plans with the strategic plans of employment and the activity of the public employment service. This more vertical governance. We're in a city that has a factory that assembles vans, and they do so in an efficient manner, but they take into account the participation of the suppliers of parts. So how do we get all the stakeholders executing the programs and services to be part of their planning? And Lanbide is looking towards the employment-based service, or the government through a law is trying to do so. And I go to the third element of management of supply, demand, of skills, and that idea that Jaime mentioned of the activities that we cannot lose sight of, which are the reason of for the existence of the public employment service. What do we need to do to provide a service to citizens? We have to see which processes Lanbide is working on to try to offer what Alfonso and I have called the improvement courses for the active population, that people are able to see what is their situation regarding the labor market. And finally, the improvements space that we also want to have in Lanbide. It is true that we have too much paperwork and administration, but we have to take into account the legal framework. Because we are an administration and we have to transform ourselves and become more positive, which is confidence. So we have to never forget this. And I've heard this in all conferences, and that is we need to take into account instrumental changes through the governance of data, but also something that Maria mentioned, the assessment of all the activity of all our programs, our services with the different assessment formulas. And finally, something that Jaime mentioned, maybe the best practice, the most innovative one, is the management of people and professionals that work in the public employment services. And he talked about the functional sphere, and I will go back to what Anton said. If we're not able to give people risk and people want to take a risk, but they also want certainties regarding their activity. And this is my contribution. Thank you, Javier. This was very clear, and you explained really well what we wanted to do in the different spheres. With these four speakers have mentioned innovations in the strategic area, in the systemic area, in governance, in organization, in operations, even at a methodological level, in programs and in assessment, as well as in learning processes. Because at the end of the day, the employment system is a community of agents that are learning together and learning through these processes. We don't have much time left, and to give time to the questions from the audience, I have a question. If you would have to, Javier just did it. He gave us a list of all the key elements, but also I will give him the opportunity to summarize this even more. If we had to find a synthetic indicator, one or two projects critical to highlight innovation in the employment system, where would we, what would we focus on? And also tweet about this, please, so that we can get or reach some conclusions. You are all going to take the floor, so if you want to be the first, Maru. Yes. Yes, I believe what's key is to reorganize the politicals on granted services. One of the problems that we face, and Javier explained this clearly, is that we need professionalization of public employment services and the guarantee of the workers in these services that they are continually trained and updated, and the reorganization of the resources to be able to render those services to citizens and companies in a way that can be assessed through time, and programs that are nourished through this network of services, which is the portfolio of services. This brings me back to what Jaime was saying, going back to the materiality of the service, looking into what is its function, understanding it clearly, and working together with the business world and adapting to these persons. This is something that we're already working on, but we still have more to do. So that's one clear priority. Who wants to add something? Maria. Well, I'm going to go to what I know about, and that is assessing. Not only because that's what I know what to do, because I believe it's a tool that not only generates knowledge and tells us what's working and what isn't, as you all pointed out, but because it's a driver for a change in paradigm and simplification of the administration process and generation of trust. When we have an integrated and systematic evaluation system that is well embedded in the system, this not only means there's a better design of programs and that we have more efficient programs, but that it is efficiency of these programs is more visible, and all these control mechanisms and bureaucracy is somehow freed or has the excuse to be reduced. So we find ourselves in a moment where we're all aware, even at the administration level, of how things need to change. And Mario and I talked about this. Even the accounting court is now working on this evaluations. They want to go one step beyond, not abandoning what they do, but also integrating this view of efficiency. So I believe that this not only generates consensus, but it's a driver for this bureaucratic paradigm that we live in. So, how do you see things? Well, if I had to summarize, as you said, I will speak about proactivity. And you cannot be proactive if you don't have a portfolio of customers. You haven't been reflecting about how your customers have to do. You cannot offer something and be proactive if you don't have a services portfolio. That's the most important thing. We need to provide proactive public services because this means you've done your homework beforehand. And giving another example, you can go to many dancing lessons, but if you don't go to the dance floor and risk yourself, you won't be able to do it. So the services cannot just theorize about what their customer portfolios has to be or service portfolio has to be. They need to be proactive, start calling people and start managing all of this. Thank you, Javier. Very good. Joseba, you close this round. I believe there should be a group of policies that I will define as a sustainable labor inclusion policies. I mean sustainable from the viewpoint of the users and those using the services. And social inclusion, meaning that they are last in time and they contribute to quality of life and welfare. And this can be achieved with a way of having both subsidies and wages, but also by improving the coordination and work of social services and employment services, and offering significant activities and providing support to the transition in employment. Sometimes there's no help regarding transport, childcare, which frustrates this incorporation to the labor market. So we need to bear this in mind, be aware of the idea of sustainability and how this is going to provide well-being, and this transfer to program activities and specific services is something important to bear in mind. Wonderful. Thank you, Joseba. 4 elements that we see as conclusions. I don't know, Eva is here. I don't know if there are any questions from the audience. I know we've gone beyond the time because we've started a bit late, so let me know how are things doing. We didn't foresee to have questions from the floor for the round table, but if there are any questions, of course you can ask these questions. And we haven't received any yet. As we've taken some of your time previously, you have 7 more minutes, and we will make the coffee break shorter. While we get questions from the audience, I do have a question. How do we create the conditions for innovation? You mentioned this, speaking about proactivity, and yesterday I linked this to the idea of sometimes stopping to be able to design and have that view. It's true, we don't have to theorize, but there are moments when we have to create the adequate conditions. You need to have data, you need to reflect, assess, reorganize the functions of the staff, the mission. What do you think need to be the previous conditions to innovation? Joseba. There's an important element that not necessarily is the only one, and which I believe is fundamental, and that's the way in which we explain to those that decide, the decision makers, the results of evaluations and of the experience of our daily job. The influence processes of the evidence generated in political decisions when drafting laws and managing specific policies have channels that we still don't know about and that we still don't have enough information about to be able to make them effective enough. Both respecting the capacity, but also bearing in mind evidence and what experience and changes in needs tell us about. So innovating means improving those communication channels between the decision makers, those evaluating and those implementing. I would like to give a specific example. The creation of technical collaborative spaces included in the strategy. Jaime mentioned this at the end of this intervention, but this is going to become a reality through a network of orientation, entrepreneurship and innovation centers. A month and a half ago, we talked and shared this the creation of this center, and this would be a space for public employment services, but also a space for experts, because it's is open to others. This technical and collaborative space where we can share best practices, where we are looking towards different realities. And then there's also something very interesting, and that is the link with the local dimension of employment. We weren't able to go into this more in depth, but this is also a key aspect to be able to go beyond the previous situation in which the service was more an administrative service and not a service linked to the needs of companies and individuals. Javier and Maria, is there anything you want to add? And in your answers, you're all focusing on elements that have to do with communication, relationships, and collaboration. So these are the previous conditions that will boost a system or an ecosystem where we can implement innovation. Maria or Javier, you decide. Sometimes we try and see how we can simplify this. How do I include innovation when innovation is not some common element in that organization? Jaime said, let's bring ourselves out of the comfort zone, and let's admit that we can be disruptive and that no one is going to question us for being so. So this innovative position is the one that will be present little by little. The organization needs to believe in it. So from the management, we need to provide support, because we need to innovate through these pilot projects that you mentioned before. And public services continue to be part of the administration. Therefore, we work in structures that already exist, but we really trust this innovation network that will have an effect on everyone. Jaime was talking about benchmarking or photographing and improving. So this situation of innovation might help us integrate this concept in our jobs. Maria, well, there's not much more to add. I'm not going to tell you what you need to do to innovate in employment, but I will tell you about my experience in the administration. Yes, the trust of the people and of the organizations to be able to put in place new things is fundamental. And pilot projects are really helpful, because the term pilot frees you from specific responsibilities, like I have to do this big thing, change a paradigm and make it work. As I said at the beginning of my talk, my experience of implementing an activity like assessment that doesn't fit in well in the structure of the administration. My experience is that you need a roadmap, you need to be ambitious and know what you want to achieve, and you have to progress little by little with no fear. And sometimes the smallest actions are the ones that are a lever for bigger changes. Yes, thank you, Maria. That was perfect, because this brings me back to what Javier was saying. To innovate, what are the conditions needed? Well, let's be explicit. Let's say that we want to innovate, and let's start by making decisions and choosing a pilot project and a field. It's a decision. It is true that collaboration and collaboration are fundamental, and we hope we reach a decision. And I believe that's a wonderful conclusion. Eva, are there any questions from the floor? And I don't know if we have time for these questions.
Estamos en tus manos.
Decide. Well, we've asked them, so you have to be super, super brief. Maru, for you, being result-oriented and having guaranteed services will mean rethinking the legal nature of the employment services. Let me repeat this. Being result-oriented and changing guaranteed services demand the change of the legal framework for the employment services. Yes, in my view, they have to be rethought. We would like to work with an agency model that we believe fits much better in with a new project and new policies. This is a long path because, as you know, changing and becoming an agency is nothing immediate, but we believe this legal framework will be much more adequate for the whole flexibilization and adaptation process, and for a more personalized service for individuals and companies. We need to also work on our portfolio of services for companies. And yes, I do think we have to rethink the model, and we are on it, but then it's difficult to change things. It's not an easy thing to do, but I hope we achieve it. And then the last question. The changes in Lambide regarding the tasks of their workers. Now they are managers of minimum wages, sometimes they are renters, maybe makes it more difficult to provide a service of quality because you don't have the time to get to know the individuals and provide this quality service. It's a statement more than a question. Yes, I believe this is quite real, and this is very much linked to the reality of Lambide, the Basque Public Employment Service. It has changed through time, and when they were starting to have a specific or be in charge of a specific task, then other tasks were added, which was the management of the minimum income, and the response that had to be provided by the professionals of Lambide was that of flexibility and where they faced a situation of uncertainty, but I hope we can now address this in the correct manner. Thank you all, thank you everyone here and those participating. Thank you.